So this is Neil Thompson. This is November 25th, 2025. Going to talk today about uh, what the new ZKPs and batch issued credentials add to data privacy. Um, the inspiration for this was some comments in various work groups a couple of weeks ago that Drummond brought back from his recent travels, that bulk credentials and ZKPs are seen as solutions to the EU digital wallet requirements on linkability. Um, However, there's some flaws in that. One of the key ones is that it pre and I'll get to those in a second. Um, but one of the issues is, I'd say it's probably the major one, is that what a lot of people are looking for in terms of interacting with AI is a personalized solution, right? Certainly the hospitality and travel uh, requirements in terms of what airlines and hotels want to do. They want to know you pretty intimately. The question then is, how do you give access to a service organization or a supply chain of service organizations in a manner that doesn't let that information be abused in any way, shape, or form? And my conclusion is you can't get limited disclosure or selective disclosure may work on a point by point basis on fairly autonomous needs, like you're buying a drink in a bar, or you're at an ATM, or you're proving you can pay in a store, all of which you don't even need to hand across your credit card. You let the credit card agent handle that for you, and you trigger it and say, pay that merchant. So the only interchange is between your wallet and the merchant to pay the merchant. So it works fine in anonymous. In fact, Carly gave me a thing looking at ZKPs. She's doing her bite-sized trusts, and comes up with exactly the same old, which is Alice walks into a bar and wants to prove that she's of an age, and a ZKP can do that for you, but a ZKP is largely bound, in my understanding, from a mathematical series. It can't prove that you were in Belgium last Thursday, because it's not a mathematical proof. It's a historical reading of the data and answering the question, were you in Belgium last week, yes or no? That's and my understanding is the batch issued credentials was an attempt to get around when you do need to exchange a credential and not necessarily do disclosure, limited selective disclosure on it. You're still going to be perhaps identifying it, because if you're going to prove that you own and hold the credential, then you're going to be exchanging at least public keys in terms of verifiability of your verifiable credential. And if you store that information of the public key and you don't rotate your keys every second, then you are potentially identifiable across different transactions using the same credential, which is a fair statement. To which the answer was, well, we'll manufacture, a bucket load, like thousands of copies of your passport or your driver's license or whatever you use as a frequent credential. And it's a one-time use, so it limits the traceability. But that only works if it's in case we talked about here, which is a simplistic case where you don't need to know my identity, but you need to have some information about me that is provable. So the same problem arises. And one of the objections that came up, which was a classic one, is why not? Digital credentials can have the same problem, and sometimes an even bigger one. A physical identifier is only glanced at, but a digital one can be copied or stored perfectly. Why not use a third-party service? Just let someone check Alice's ID and send a yes or no answer. But that creates a new problem. The service learns everything about Alice from that credential. Not necessarily everything about Alice, but certainly everything about that particular license or passport, and could track her behavior every time she orders a drink. Okay, but if you were going, that's true, but that's only under a very limited circumstance where only some fairly simplistic information is about which no personal information is needed to deliver the service. So it'd be like going in and asking for, just trying to think here, some sort of medical procedure. You're at a foreign clinic saying I'm feeling ill, and there's various medicines available to it, but what medicine would be recommended to you may be dependent on something in your medical history. You may have an allergy or something else. So in which case you're still stuck. I don't care how you do it. You're going to have to hand over more than anonymous information of a yes/no answer um, in order to do that. And of course, the more information you have to disclose, such as medical condition, they're going to say, okay, your health, your size, your weight, your medical history, what you've had in the last 6 months, your nationality, what's your ethnic background, because in some cases medical treatments will tend to be skewed depending on your genetic history. So the second you get any sort of personalization, we're back to auditing. We're back to Scott's admonition that it's only with vetting of the mechanisms, and you and I have talked about this certainly, is that unless you have some track record of what was accessed and what was done with the information in terms of logging, then any service is it's not controllable short of a human auditor examining your processes, certifying your code base, and locking it down to a given code hash as to what it's going to do with it, that you have no means of even detecting that an organization is abusing your information. And certainly the one thing I've learned in the hospitality and travel industry is the Expedias and Booking.coms of this world are absolutely convinced that getting additional personal information about you, even if you do not disclose it, and they learned it through other parties or by guessing at your preferences through your behavior in terms of what you look at before booking a trip, et cetera, they see that as essential to their profitability and their ability to, what's the word I'm looking for? Conversion of marketing and advertising dollars into additional customers. So it's not clear to me that there is a simple solution to that. And now this is an EIDAS wallet requirement. So it's not that it's
yeah, but I think the only thing, keeping things within reason, that they're going to have copies of the whatever date it is. So whether you go scuba diving or skiing, or whatever, the only advantage anybody has is that that data becomes stale at one point. So if I went scuba diving 25 years ago, that information is kind of stale. Doesn't mean I'm going to go scuba diving next week or next vacation I go on. So that's the only thing saving grace, right? Because you can't stop anybody from copying it. It's just how relevant that information becomes less and less viable or useful every day that goes by.
Yeah, and certainly absolutely agree.
Unless it's medical, of course, right? But at that point, do you really care if the guy operating on you knows all your personal information? I think I'm okay with that.
Well, there's one other thing that in looking at this that was fairly clear is if you're looking at and wheelchair accessibility and let's call it altitude related issues in terms of somebody needs supplemental oxygen factory tool, not a tank but something that can concentrate the air on aircraft or for travel. Typically, it's only aircraft. If you have trouble with altitude, then you going on a vacation to visit what's the place down in Peru?
Machu Picchu.
Machu Picchu. Yeah. So people going to Machu Picchu that suddenly discover, and there's a very high pass to get there.
Yeah.
It's actually higher than Machu Picchu. If you can't make it over the pass, you need to go home. I got a friend of mine. His wife contracted that. So, but part of the question you can do there in terms of limiting it, you can change, what is the medical underlying condition from what do you need? I need a wheelchair does not say I've got, spinal degradation or something else. That may be the case, or it may be, I need a wheelchair because I'm recovering from a hip operation. I don't really have anything wrong with me. Uh, so you can put information in place that says we're not going to, don't you don't need to share the causes. What you need is something that goes in and looks at for travel, in to Machu Picchu. Let's have some agent sit in a sandbox and say, okay, based on you allowing me very temporary permission to read your entire medical profile, you could even go to a doctor and hand it to them. That's another possibility. It's not you. It's a doctor doing that. Certainly, there's precedent for that because uh, there's a phrase for it in the airline industry, fitness for travel, right? So if you've got issues, they got a 2-page or 4-page PDF form that the doctor has spots to write in all the potential concerns about a patient, or a client of theirs, as to whether they're suitable for travel, right? So now, in that case, the doctor is actually putting the conditions on the page, and it's being handed to the airline who assesses it. But there's no reason why you can't say, okay, needs wheelchair assist to get on the plane, needs access to power for a oxygen concentrator, et cetera, et cetera. Could say the same thing for, what are the requirements what are the needs that come out of your condition, not the conditions themselves,
Right.
because there's quite a difference. So there are some mechanisms in there. Uh, so so that's, but not sharing personal information. And like I said, the teeth needs to be in the governance, in auditing, and ultimately reputation and credentialing of services, because that's certainly one of the things that the people who know the supply chain in the hospitality and travel industry tell me is that one of the problems you have is outside some of the bigger players like the Bookings and the Expedias, the major airlines, major hotel chains. Um, it gets really thin really quickly in terms of verifiable credentials of any kind. Forget about, electronic ones. Get some hotel, and as somebody pointed out, I may have said this before, I've been told that for a given hotel property, meaning a site, there may be as many as 6 different organizations involved, um, from the organization that owns the land to the organization that built the hotel to the organization that's managing the hotel to the organization that's managing the customer services at the hotel. So in terms of who are you dealing with as a viable uh, entity in terms of financial transaction, like giving them a deposit uh, for a hotel stay, that gets really kind of thin very quickly. Now, what's reasonable for that is that, if somebody's got, an issued organizational thing from within a country, then you're probably in good shape. And that's the principle behind trust registries, right? So I can prove that, and that trail, it's like we're talking here on Trust Over IP about um, trust path, right? So trust path is uh, something that, glyph, as you and I have talked about before, glyph is certainly an example of an explicit path that you can trace from Joe Blow, who says, hey, I'm the purchasing agent for company X, back up through the corporation or subcorporation, through the chain up through glyph. So that's a way of verifying that, you're a legitimate. And that's something that is sorely lacking. And what I've also learned from talking with John Phillips from Australia, he's on the UN FACT,
Yeah.
uh,
The
and
trade.
and as he says, the biggest single issue is you can ask for every organization and every nation state to, follow ecosystem rules and have registered entities, and, somebody who's the equivalent of, the Better Business Bureau or the local, um, I can't recall what typically it is here in Canada. Um, you've got you're a registered business. You're registering either provincially or incorporated provincially or federally typically, and then acts as a registrar. So in many countries, there may not be an official registrar or a credible one. But the reality check is that trade happens worldwide, basically based on pieces of PDF paper, faxed and emailed, where somebody is, possibly by reputation, vouched for somebody who's a shipper or a receiver of products. So, it's all a little tenuous at this point. So that's basically, just to remark upon, um, I guess, a general comment that people are still have a hammer to which everything looks like a nail. I've got, cryptographic technology, and I'm going to tackle every problem as being something that's technically solvable. And my understanding is that the pushback on both ZKPs, and there's a lot of money being thrown at it, renewed uh, levels of money being thrown at ZKPs to do the more complex kind of zero knowledge proofs. But the price of that is also execution time. So that means the cost of each transaction or each proof goes up. And of course, the same thing applies to, and Drummond said it, he said the concern of the industry is they have a technical solution in terms of batch issued credentials, but number one, your wallet better be pretty sizable. And number two, the cost of generating, thousands of credentials.
What is the batch credentials?
Well, basically, it's take a verifiable credential and using one-time signatures that are backed by, the ultimate private key, is generate a whole series of one-offs that can be provable as being, uh, shall we say, an official copy.
Oh, that's the thing you
Um,
said before. So here's 1,000 copies, the one-time use, my
yeah,
passport.
one-time use that, and it's back to, Sam Smith has always said, look, they're not making it impossible to trace you on that. They're just making it much more expensive, right? So if
So
yes,
what's the benefit of generating 1,000 of these if you only need one at a time? Why not
because
just
you
why not just
well,
do like, two-factor authentication, right? It's a one-time password. When you need it, you generate it and you send it. What would be the point of creating 1,000 of them?
it's the sense that you've got to reply with some like a public key to verify that you own, in fact, that you own the credential. So something has to get registered. It's just that if you're looking across multiple transactions and you use a new one for each transaction, then you can't be linked based on that use of that particular credential. So if every time you have to, let's say every time you walked into a bar or a restaurant, you had to prove your age, or prove the same thing could apply to proving you have a payment card. If the credential associated with a credit card is you could be tracked on your credit card use everywhere it pings up, then if somebody has access or people agree to share transaction records
Why
on
not
a
just
payment card.
generate the one off on demand? Why do you have to create a batch of them?
Because then it's not issued. It doesn't have an issuer. You're now generating it yourself, which means, okay, now, so that's my understanding is that it still needs to have ultimately backed up through the trust path that the issuer is using something that it's got this hidden backroom key that it can be traced to as being the actual issuer. Whereas if you're doing it, short of it,
Right,
you know,
but I mean, if you think about when you get medication or prescription from your doctor and you're able to refill it X number of times, right? I don't
Mhm.
go to the doctor every time I need to fill the bottle. I only need to go when I hit my max or whatever, my expiration date. So the way like batch sounds like they're going to give me like 1,000 bottles of medication for me to use when I need, as opposed to just go fill it up when you need it. So why couldn't you
Yeah.
cryptographically assure that the one I generated is exactly the same thing that was generated by the issuer? That doesn't seem like a
Well,
hard problem to solve.
well, for whatever reason, this is the path they took, right? There are always ways to ameliorate that, and your level of confidence depends on who's asking the question or who's putting the criteria. can go up and down, and there's many different ways to do it, right? Um, it's so there's lots of solutions out there. It's just a remark that looking at linkability in a very narrow window and on very specialized circumstances, that's going to help you. Does not solve the general problem of overall data privacy. That's I think the main point that I take away from it is
Mhm.
that you know you're not going to get personal services without sharing that information, and if it's been shared, even if it's like I don't know, thank Kurt Drummond for giving the term to it, micro sharing. Even if you're doing extremely tightly bound selective disclosure through micro sharing, and with the right to come back and ask for it later as a token that you would issue, um, you still have, the cumulative effect problem of over many transactions that people, sit there and collect it and then decide to share it. Then, and there's nothing absolutely stopping people from sharing data short of somehow colorizing the information. But, once the data's been shared, you can't really control the processing of that information,
Right.
and recording of it. There's no absolute guarantee if someone's really determined to do so. You need that in the clear to actually use it. Otherwise, the alternative is to make it so difficult to process that the costs go up and people say, we're not going to use that technique because we can't afford the uh, cycles like ZKP. So,
Well, I don't know the travel industry like you do now, but my suspicion is that uh, personal information is a lot more valuable to them than it is to me. So if they want to know, can they send me on a scuba diving trip? That has more dollar value for them than if I just see a list of services in the area. Like I don't see a big benefit about them saying, "Hey, do you want to go scuba diving?" I think I would know that that area has scuba diving, whether it's through them or not. And I just think it sounds like the data capture is much more beneficial to them than it is for me. I can't imagine as I mean, I'm not talking about, the John Jordans, traveling on Air Canada situation. That's completely different. But whether I like shellfish or not, aside from allergies, it just seems to be there's a lot more benefit like ROI on that data for the industry than it is for the traveler.
yeah, very much so. But
I
again,
don't
the
think it serves me
criteria
that
here.
well at all.
Sorry?
I don't really think it serves me that well. I mean, if I'm
The
going on a
whole
ski trip, I'm obviously going on a ski trip. I mean, I didn't choose to go to a beach. So,
No, but I think it's really if I understand the base purpose behind the linkability question is that nobody can say, okay, we've now watched you and we've watched everywhere you spent money or everywhere you had to show, certain information. Um, or, we saw you traveled, through this country or whatever else. That the linkability thing is, which is also the reason there's been so much of pushback on the MDL driving license because it has a feature baked into it to call home every time your license is
right.
presented. It goes back to the government or some agency. Um, so that I would agree. In fact, if anything, um, the sort of information that I'm hearing about, like altitude related trips, or well, actually, if you think about scuba divers going, you know, is also
Reverse opposite
well,
altitude.
it's a risk, but it also involves the limitations about scuba diving are also about your ability to breathe, you know,
Right.
and your fitness and everything else. So, something that's uh, directly related to your let's call it aerobic capabilities and general fitness. Like I said, a few months ago did questions of saying what's the kind of information that a ski resort, particularly a custom ski resort is looking for, um, that caters to specialized needs. So something like the Bugaboos out in BC, where you're doing helicopter skiing, right? You better be pretty supremely fit to do that. Or scuba diving, right? It's okay. So I need to know that you're certified fit. Um, so some of these scuba divers are saying, okay, I want to see I want you to contact a fitness professional who's got credentials and have him do, this test, all right? And see what your heart rate is, what's your recovery time, whether you can even do the fitness test, yes or no, because it ain't, it's been more than 25 years since I last went scuba diving. But yeah, when I went, you didn't have to have a NAEU or PADI card, which the two, at least North America, certification groups. But you had to show you were fit, and they put you through some pretty grueling swim and other tests before they let you go anywhere near a tank, because the downsides are really, really horrendous if they've got especially if they had a group of like 6 or 7 people, all of whom were kind of questionable. One or two gets in trouble, man, you're as a tour operator, you're in really bad shape for that. So I understand that, and to your point, having very current information on certain aspects, and certain medical conditions, to be reasonable to flag, say, okay, can you hand me a doctor's note saying you're in good shape for the next 2 months to fly or do whatever. Makes a lot of sense without revealing what the underlying problem is. So just says credentials are going to get used for a whole bunch of things, including, somebody, in other words, I would see like doctors and lawyers all getting as part of their certification as, practice, a lawyer who can practice in a given jurisdiction, or the same thing for physicians, is they get a credential. They can say, okay, I'm going to sign notes with that, so that can go straight through, and then it would streamline a lot of questions, because as I said, going through John Jordan's thing, it took him 2 full months to get a go-ahead for him to travel by air. So that's a lot of cost for the airline and for the time for the person traveling. So if that stuff was available, ding ding, and now it's on the record, and you could even say, okay, your credential for that expires yearly. You have to have a new note. That can happen in background. So in other words, privacy is not. There's no simple technical hack. That's
No.
If I had to put it in a single phrase, that would be it. There's no technical solution for it, especially if it's an unscrupulous vendor who's looking to
Right,
get your.
like you said, it has to do with the governance, has to do with auditability, it has to do with relationships and reputation, and those are all soft, right? I mean, as long as
Yeah.
you survive an audit, at least you get a reputation, but it's as good as the auditor.
Yeah, the only thing you could, if you've got a lot of sources backing the reputation who are themselves graded on their reputability, then that's it's just like having Consumer Reports rank your
Right.
television high on that list,
If you
right?
see on TV the ads like Trust Advisor or stuff like that, Trust Pilot, that's basically what it's going to come down to, whether you believe it or not. But I agree, there's no technical solution to privacy because it's just not possible.
Not
It's like the person said, it's a lot easier to copy a digital, copy of something than it is a physical one. You don't see the border security agents taking scans with their phone of your passport. Well, they do anyway.
No. Yeah, well, that's just it. It's sort of like certainly anything I've seen and heard says that something on your smartphone where that they watch you confirm that it's you on with your own phone, saying, yep, this is the owner of the phone, and then you show going through the process, and then you say, here's the certificate. They go, boom, it reduces their costs. It speeds up boarding planes and everything else. They're all gung-ho for it. It's proliferating for certainly for the upper price range travel. That doesn't mean the plane's not going to be late. It's a different problem. Okay, well, that's all I have for this week, was just to touch on that, in terms of, so selective disclosure does something for you. In other words, you're not necessarily inadvertently handing across the whole information. But if you look at historically over time, you've got the competition of people need to know that you're up to date information. So them holding it is not a good thing. And one of the things that the project is doing is it talking to insurers like Chubb, et cetera, as to what do they consider the risks to be in terms of the impact of sharing personal data um, on cyber insurance costs. And basically, the answer is you have, if you have very careless personal data management as a company, your cyber costs are going to double, um, and just out of that small portion. So the risk is that says several things to me. One is the insurance industry puts a very high impact uh, on personal data as the stuff that is going to be come after by someone. It's once the stolen the identity, they can say enough of the information to convince someone else they're you. The other thing is, of course, payment cards. But my understanding from some conversations by Visa Europe and other organizations saying, they're going to work. Their approach is that the merchant never sees anything. Instead of it went from you're handing over your credit card, zink, they've got your number and your expiry date, and then with most recent stuff where you're doing a tap, it's doing a one-time code, which says yes, this is authorized based on in other words, the app on the phone saying handing over something that is I've got a key that the app has got from, say, Visa or MasterCard, to say the merchant, all their terminal gets is that one-time code to say yes, you're going to get paid, right? But you're still, in many cases, you still have a lot of people saying we want to have your credit card on file. Well, they're going, well, we're no longer going to do that. You're going to have your app is going to do all the work, and they're never going to know what your credit card is. They can come and ask for verification or do a mini transaction to make sure it's valid, like a 1 sentence thing. But holding someone's payment card on file is just going to become a thing of the past because of the honeypot factor, right? So one of the things that people have commented on is Spain ask for an insane amount of information. They want to hold your passport, passport, your personal name, who you work for, and everything else. And so it's just created a huge potential. The Spanish, someone ever breaches the Spanish servers, they're going to know, insane amounts of level of detail. And the hotels have to report that information, including all your passport information and everything else, to the local government, which is kind of cringeworthy. But that's where it is right now.
Cool. What's your next milestone?
It's really getting the on this project or
this.
I don't really at this point. I'm not quite sure what to cover off because data is not a hot topic in trust over AP. It's hot over on DIF because of the project we're working on for the hospitality and travel, but so there's a large part of how does data fit into that world. So we're certainly talking about it here in terms of data privacy, but I'm not really clear what additional topics are of interest. Have you got any that you might suggest?
No, I'm talking about from the hospitality, from DIF's point of view. I'm not talking about trust over IP.
Well, the travel profile is I've got it up and working, so I'm about to do first major check-in of a completely working system, but without all the preferences and whatever else filled in, because I've run through and tripped across bugs with even some basic stuff. So it's to get it out there and get more people cranked on it so we can start cranking out the actual content and get out it for proof of concept early in the first quarter of next year.
Wow.
So it's been a lot more complicated than I expected.
Right.
Like I said, GitHub so overwhelmingly dictates how you do software development in terms of how you think about it, how you organize it on disk, um, what your cycle is, what order you do things in. Um, and yeah, there's lots of automation out there, but you're available, but you got to customize it and get it working and make lots of snapshots in case something goes wrong. So that learning curve has been substantial.
Yeah, it's rough.
And so there's a lot of moving parts in there that, the rest of anybody who's been in software in the last 15 years is someone who's got code deliverables on their plate. They've so internally committed to it. In other words, it's just taken for granted that you've been spending your entire career on this stuff. So you should know everything there is to know about it, which gets doubly complicated when you're creating a GitHub repository without assisting
Yeah, well,
experts.
Copilo's pretty good at helping out. I'll tell you that.
No, that I would say yes. If it hadn't been for that, I'd still be floundering.
Right.
So
Yeah, yeah.
at this point, it
Especially.
says here's the standard way to do it, and based on your requirements that you're giving me, I'll fix it and have a look at it and go, okay, I get it, but that's not really what I meant. So, but at least it's good at that kind of iteration kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
it was like having someone who doesn't have the domain expertise or the creativity expertise, but
Yeah.
understands the technology and how to get it to do stuff.
Right. It's like having a geek next to you who can answer very specific questions. Doesn't know what you're doing, but they can answer those questions. Yeah, I think it's been very helpful in that area too.
Yeah. So the skill is in knowing the right questions to ask.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. All
All
right.
right.
Very
Been good to
good.
chat, and we'll see what it comes up with in terms of recording on this one.
All right. Thanks, Neil. Good luck.
Yep.
Okay.
Talk
Bye.
soon.